E.M. Kaplan, and I direct the Humanities Institute here at SUNY Stony Brook. And I'm delighted to welcome you all to this second great debate in the Institute's In Dialogue series, organized with Malcolm Bowman and his group in SOMAS. This is a multi-department collaboration, bringing the hard sciences, social sciences, and the humanities together. And I must say, the Institute is absolutely delighted to be working with this group and with this project. And I want to thank everyone involved for helping this come about as we see. I also want to thank Jim Klurfeld, who's been central in organizing this and will moderate the panel today. And again, the Provost Office for their support and publicity in promoting this event. It's always great to have the Provost Office with us. We're thrilled, too, to have Elaine Kamarck, a distinguished visitor, to debate with us today. It's a really great honor on this incredibly vital topic on humans running out of time to save our planet. And it's very nice that our meeting is timed so neatly, I don't know how deliberately, with the Cancun meeting going on, as you know, right now. However despondent we might be about what they're going to be able to do, and I'm sure the panel will be talking about that. We look forward to another collaboration and debate in spring 2011. We haven't quite finalized the title, and you'll hear about it, no doubt, in due time. I don't want to take up more time, but I do want to just announce one event, because the Institute didn't get its publicity out. This Thursday, December 2nd, Peter Manning, April Maston, and Susan Checker will talk about currents in transatlantic exchange, medicine, music, and dance. And the Institute will have its celebratory party, end-of-term party, following that event. And I hope that this panel and all of you will come and join us to celebrate. Now I'm going to turn over to Jim Klurfeld. And thank you, Jim, for...
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you to the Humanities Institute for making this possible, and to the Provost Office for joining hands with us in this effort. Obviously, our timing is terrific with the meeting in Cancun, although I suspect we'll get more done here than they're going to get done there. Last time we met, we did a Oxford-style debate, and we decided that this time we're going to have more of a panel discussion than a debate. And the genesis of this was an article that I think most of you might have a copy of now by Peter Goldmark, who has been at the Environmental Defense Fund, an organization that I think many of you remember started here at Stony Brook many years ago. And Peter, who's an old friend of mine, wrote an article, or was interviewed for an article. He has spent the last 5 years working on the question of climate change and trying to move the political process forward. And he said something that I thought was very provocative. He said, my generation has failed to do something about one of the most important problems facing us as a people, not as a country. It's multinational, but we haven't been able to move it forward. And then lo and behold, I talked to my good friend Elaine Kamarck at Harvard, and she did a terrific paper looking at the junction of science, policy, politics, and economics to try to explain a little bit why we've had so much trouble moving forward. So I thought it would be interesting to use that. Peter's comment today is, why have we failed? And then we can kick it around. We have scientists, we have social scientists here. We have my friend Elizabeth Bass, who's a journalist, and get a good view of it all. Let me introduce the panel very quickly. There's Elaine Kamarck, who was a White House official from 1993 to 1997, created and managed President Clinton's National Performance Review, better known to many of us as Reinventing Government. She was a top staff person to Vice President Al Gore. She's been since 1997 at the Kennedy School as a public policy lecturer, and also doing any number of other tasks there. She also, I must say, was a writer and a columnist for my old newspaper, Newsday. I asked her to give a politician's view of what's happening. Elaine is unique in that she's been in the nitty-gritty of election politics, and she also has her PhD from Berkeley in political science, so she knows it from both sides. And she's continued to write. She did a story, Policy Implementation in the 21st Century, and more recently, Primary Politics, How Presidential Candidates Have Shaped the Modern Nominating System. We also are very fortunate to have Carl Safina with us again. Carl is president of the Blue Ocean Institute, an adjunct professor here at Stony Brook, and a winner of the prestigious Pew Fellowship, MacArthur Fellowship, and Guggenheim Fellowship. And he's also the author of many books. The most recent, and it's out, Carl, isn't it? The View from Lazy Point?
It's coming out in January.
Coming out in January, okay, so we can all be prepared for it. The View from Lazy Point, A Natural Year in an Unnatural World. Then there's my good friend Malcolm Bowman, who is a professor of oceanography and a distinguished service professor at Stony Brook University, and a leading and respected voice on environmental matters, both here at the university on Long Island, and I think throughout the world. And he has also been the organizer of these events for us, the man behind the scenes who put this together. Lee Koppelman has agreed to be with us again. Lee is an old friend. He's a professor of political science and director of the Regional Policy Studies at Stony Brook. He was director of the Suffolk County Planning Department for many years and executive director of the Nassau-Suffolk and Tri-County Regional Planning Board. And I would tell you, over a long career, he's had more positive impact on our life and the environment in Long Island than probably anybody else in this room. And then finally, my longtime colleague, Elizabeth Bass, who was often my editor when I was in Washington or traveling overseas, who's now the interim director for the Center for Communicating Science in the journalism school. She was a science and health editor where she supervised a series of stories that won the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory journalism. And she's the co-author of 2 books, Bioterrorism, A Guide for Hospital Preparedness, and Kids Health Guide for Parents, Pregnancy to Age 5. So I think we have an interesting group of people. I'm going to ask Elaine to start it off. And I'm just going to warn our panelists, I'm going to enforce the time limits with a little red, show Malcolm.
Little red.
Forget that. If you ignore that, you go through the floor.
Thank you, Jim, for having me, and for all of you for attending this rainy afternoon on such an important issue. This is particularly good timing for a panel like this, not just because Cancun is happening today, but because we are at a punctuation point in the history of the environmental movement. And we often, as political scientists, talk about policy as having punctuation points, places where something changes. Hopefully, changes in a positive way, but nevertheless, there is a change. And we are clearly at a point with the transition from one Congress to another, with the death of cap and trade, at a point where we need to take stock and think about where we go from here in the environmental movement. To do that, let me spend my time with you doing a little bit of the history of this, and as a way of sort of understanding how we got here. Some of us think of the environmental movement in 2 distinct eras. The first era, really, you can start with 1962, with the publication of a book called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Some of you in the room will remember the publication of that book. Some of you were not born. For those of you who were not born, go pick it up. It's a rather remarkable book. And it burst upon the American scene like nothing anyone had ever seen. And part of the reason was that it explained things that was going on in America. Environmental era number 1. You could see, you could smell, you could taste. The first environmental movement had dead birds in the backyards of the suburbs. It had fish floating up on the water. It had air that made you, cough and made your eyes burn. the first environmental movement was very real. And it was not partisan at all. In fact, it was Richard Nixon who shortly after, in 1970, created the Environmental Protection Agency. So it was a Republican who created the Environmental Protection Agency. The first environmental movement had a reality to Americans. It was linked to health, it was linked to wellness, and it was supported. And in fact, many great things happened as a result of that. Those of us old enough to remember can remember a certain river that used to catch on fire. One can catch fish in that river today. So the first era of the environmental movement really has had a great number of successes. And it's not all perfect, but there was really a lot to commend it. The second era, we really start with 1986. 1986, the summer of 1986, is when Dr. James Hansen, a scientist at NASA, did at NSA, Oceanography, I think. Where was he? NASA. Testified before Congress during an extraordinarily hot summer about this problem that was going on and about the relationship between what was going on in the world and in the emission of carbon dioxide with the heating up of the planet and what we were seeing in terms of climatic changes. And he put that together really for the first time. It was quite a dramatic summer, and it begins really the sort of second stage of the environmental movement. That second stage, of course, is problematic from a political perspective, because even though many of us can recount the extreme weather events that have increased in intensity since that period of time, the fact of the matter is they come and they go. They don't affect everyone at the same time. It doesn't have the immediacy that the first environmental movement had. Not surprisingly, it has been more problematic politically and will in fact continue to be more problematic politically unless we reach a tipping point, which I'll let the scientists talk about, and of course by that point it's too late. So this is a political problem of really sort of unprecedented difficulty. Now, two things to say about that. First of all, for a long time, climate change was really basically ignored, okay? You don't really, if you do a LexisNexis search, you don't really find a lot of references to climate change in the 70s or in the 80s in the popular press. Scientists obviously were dealing with it, but it's not a topic in the popular press. Al Gore, my old boss, did the first hearings on this in the United States Congress. There was the dramatic testimony of James Hansen, but it's still not very much on the front burner. We have two experiments from the 90s that then impact how we began to think about policy on climate change. Experiment number one was the passage of the BTU, or the failure to pass the BTU tax in 1993. What this said was, never use the word tax. If you use the word tax, you're always going to lose. So the environmental movement as a whole retreated from the notion of a carbon tax, the notion of pricing carbon, which they had been previously very interested in. The second thing that happens around the same time, a little bit earlier, under the first George Bush, as somebody referred to him the other day, the good Bush, the other thing that happens is passage of the sulfur dioxide trading emissions system. And that turned out to be a terrific success. Even though environmentalists, when it was first proposed, were horrified at the notion that you were going to let people pay for pollution. Well, the SO2 emissions trading turned out to actually reduce acid rain. Some of us remember when you used to read about acid rain a lot. Nowadays, you don't read about it very much unless it's in China or some other part of the world. So those two things kind of shaped the environmental policy debate. And as we moved into this decade, there was a consensus that we ought to do a trading system called cap and trade. And that the trading system was the way to go to price carbon. That we had to price carbon because it was bad. If we didn't price carbon, we'd never make alternative energy sources economically competitive, and therefore we had to price carbon. And so, beginning in 2003, 3 separate cap and trade bills have been proposed in the Congress, and 3 separate cap and trade bills have failed. Why? One reason is, frankly, mammoth complexity of all of those bills. Nobody quite ever knew what was in them. Reason number 2 is the problem of putting together a trading system in a political system, which meant that as they moved through Congress, there were all sorts of exceptions. In order to get Senator so-and-so's vote, you had to exempt the aluminum industry in his state. In order to get Senator so-and-so's vote, you had to exempt this industry in her state, and on, so that there was a point last spring when, frankly, a lot of environmentalists were looking at this 1,000-page bill and saying, is this actually any good? And the third reason is that starting in 2008 with the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the subsequent collapse of the economy, America's sort of romance with markets as a way of achieving social policy had a rather abrupt end. A lot of people didn't understand what cap and trade was. Explaining it didn't actually help the situation. I saw a focus group where this was explained in a very neutral way, and a woman in the group, an environmentalist, the state of Oregon, very green state, said, okay, let me get this straight. We're supposed to give the future of the planet to the people who brought us the economic collapse. So once it was explained, people said, oh yeah, we got it. This is a trading system. This is something where, you could watch the blood drain from the faces of environmentalists once you said, oh, imagine credit default derivatives on carbon permits. Because of course that's what trading systems do. They are open to manipulation, they're open to game playing, etc. And so the collapse of the broader economy did 2 things to the environmental movement. One, it brought about a huge distrust of trading systems as a means to solve this problem, and that was seen in Congress and in the nervousness over this system. And secondly, frankly, it took away any incentive to pay more money for energy or gasoline, which is, after all, essential to pricing carbon, okay? If you try to pretend that's not the case, then you're really fooling yourself. But finally, the final problem that we face in going forward, am I almost, okay, good, almost done, is that if you go back to polls in 1998, and you ask people in polls, what are the effects of global warming, are they already being felt? About the same number of Democrats and Republicans, just about half, said yes. As the first decade of the 21st century went on, something happened to this issue which is really not good for political issues in America. Republicans increasingly said, no, this isn't real. And Democrats increasingly said, yes. So that if I brought PowerPoints, I would show you 2 lines that go like this. So over the course of a decade, this issue went from being a bipartisan issue to being an extremely partisan issue. And that's where we are today. The problem with that is that, as we know from American history, big changes in policy don't usually come from one party or another acting on its own. Big changes usually come in a bipartisan way. So the first challenge before us is to get this back to being a less partisan issue than it currently is. The second challenge, given the economic crisis, is to think about pricing carbon in a revenue-neutral way. In other words, pricing carbon because carbon's the problem, but in fact offsetting that price with some other kind of tax cut. I prefer a payroll tax cut. Other people have other ideas of how to do it. That's a sort of detail that we can talk about later. The fact of the matter is we are back to the drawing board, and I'm out of time. Thanks.
Let me just mention, as Elaine finishes, she has an excellent paper that goes into detail on everything she's talked about that's available at the Kennedy School site at Harvard.
4 minutes?
No? 5. You can have 3 to 5 minutes.
Well, thank you all for coming. It's good to look out at this audience and see people of all ages, from little baby Caitlin at the back there, 3 or 4 months old, up to parents and grandparents and lots of students. This debate today is focused on motivating young people. And I get from Goldmark's, I call it a lament, as he leaves the Office of Climate and Atmospheres at the Environmental Defense Fund in New York City. He is lamenting that our generation, the older generation, had failed miserably in addressing the issue of climate change. So we're handing the problem to our children and our grandchildren. So I think it's a great privilege working at a major research university where we have the opportunity to bring these issues to young people, the next generation. The second point I got out of Goldmark's essay is, how do we energize the US government to get serious about climate change and renewable energy? The pollution, in the wider sense, is getting worse daily, and he talks about the shameful paralysis of the US Senate. And Elaine has just explained all this to us in illuminating what the problems are, and it's not getting any easier. When you think of the influence of the Tea Party on the Obama administration's agenda, you start to get worried. I think perhaps our biggest hope is groups of states, both on the West Coast, from California all the way up the West Coast, including British Columbia and Canada, and in the Northeast, governors of those states working to come up with ways of mitigating some of these effects is the way forward. The third point I got from Goldmark's essay is, we as a society still do not understand the urgency of the problem. And the way I sort of try to understand this myself is that the timescales between our human lifespan and the timescale of climate change are not the same. Climate change, although we talk about rapid climate change, it still seems very slow compared to our life. In other words, I feel I'm aging faster than climate's changing. So how do we get a sense of urgency that we've got to act now and make significant changes? It's very difficult. It's almost not in our genes to worry about the distant future, even though, you know, we care dearly about our offspring and their offspring, and would do anything to protect them, and yet, on the other hand, for some reason, we don't care. And the fourth point, I think that Peter Goldmark was saying, is the importance of communicating science. And I think it's a wonderful development in the history of Stony Brook University that we have our new School of Journalism. Elizabeth and Howie Schneider, who's not here, I said we should be here, but he decided not to come.
He's teaching.
I don't care, he should have wanted
Teaching the next generation.
Anyway, a new initiative at our new school is just that, communicating science. And science, including medicine and the environment, and Carl, our distinguished speaker,
Medicine, the environment, and
is
that's a lot of responsibility.
he's the co-chairman of the steering committee. So we're expecting good things to happen. So there's an opportunity to think at a university with lots of young people and a School of Journalism that's really interested in this topic to make some progress in the years ahead. Thank you.
well, the way I see it is that climate is changing faster than I'm aging. Because one of the main things I actually spend my time doing is traveling to distant places in other continents and writing about how the ocean is changing, especially the ocean, how the ocean and the coasts are changing and what those changes mean for people and for wildlife. And I first became aware of the idea that the carbon dioxide that we give off from burning fossil fuels is changing the planet with Bill McKibben's book, which came out in 1987, I think it was, which was called The End of Nature. And it was called The End of Nature because up until that time, people had, well, up until, let's say, the early 1900s, I don't think it ever occurred to anybody that people could change the world. During the 20th century, especially with the atomic era and the arms race, people did get a deep impression that we could change and in fact destroy the world. And from Rachel Carson's book, which was an amassing of a lot of scientific studies about how the pollutants that we had created only in the 1940s for the first time, the organochlorine pesticides, didn't break down and went from the farms we put them on to as far away as the eggs of penguins and the milk of Eskimo women. And all of this was brand new in the history of the world and really shocking to people. Rachel Carson's book put that together for the first time. But everybody thought that the weather was natural. And so Bill McKibben's book was called The End of Nature because he was showing that we were actually also changing the climate, not just polluting the rivers and the land. We were actually polluting the air enough to change the heat balance of the whole planet. So that's when I first became aware of it. And when I first became aware of it, was in a discussion about the book with somebody. I hadn't read the book yet. And my reaction as a professional environmentalist was, forget about it, that is nonsense. Nonsense. That just can't be happening. And then I read into it a little bit and I realized that, yeah, it can be happening. And all the science is lock solid, and I believed it. But I traveled around for about another 10 years, and all of the different scientists that I visited, when I was writing about penguins, or I was writing about albatrosses, or I was doing fisheries stuff, whether it was the Arctic or the Antarctic or the tropics, with coral ecologists talking about how the corals were dying in years when it was very hot. This was all mostly hypothetical. A few little indications here and there that there might be something happening, but mostly it was for the future, until about the last 7 or 8 years. And now every place I go, except in the United States of America, people talk about and show me all the changes they've seen as the climate has changed. The distribution of their animals, the changes in the breeding season timing, the shrinking back of glaciers, the breaking up of ice, the melting of frozen parts of the ocean, the mass die-offs of coral, the slowing of the rate of growth of coral, the thinning of the walls of corals, people in the Arctic having their villages washing away because the ocean doesn't freeze anymore, but the storms still come. All of this is absolutely happening, clear and present danger. I've seen it all with my own eyes, and if all the scientific measurements are totally wrong, the poles are melting and the coral reefs are dying of heat stroke. So it's very odd that in America people don't want to believe it. And as Elaine said, it has become a political issue. Now, many of our greatest political heroes, or my greatest political heroes, were Republicans. Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, who basically invented the idea of national parks and was an incredible conservationist, a hero of anybody who loves nature. And Dwight Eisenhower, who said, beware the military-industrial complex and the rise of the influence of money. I mean, imagine a Republican saying that now. The Republican Party was totally different until Ronald Reagan and the neocons. It became a totally different thing. It was a switch. It was one of those card game things. It's not the same party, it's not the same philosophy, it's not the same group of people, and it's not the same politics. In the past in America, everyone agreed on reality because science is the only thing we have that systematically tries to seek what is real, and people respected that because science had brought us all the great discoveries we have in medicine, in technology, biology, geology, all of that stuff. It obviously works. So people could agree to find out what's really happening, and then we could fight over how much you should spend on it, how fast you should do that, what should be the trade-offs and the implications. But now there's this very damaging thing, which is that one whole political party, which is roughly half the people in the country, don't recognize reality. And they say things like, we don't believe in climate change, which is an absurd kind of a statement. Even if climate change wasn't happening, it's an absurd kind of a statement, because either it's happening or it's not. And how do you know? You go out and you measure stuff and you see what's happening in the world. That's how you know. It's not a matter of faith. It's a matter of fact. So to me, the main problem that we have is the politicization of science brought by the organized disinformation campaign that is unbelievably well funded, funded by billionaires and giant corporations and giant companies who can buy all the politics they want. And that's why we can't have a real debate about it. That's why these things don't fail after an honest and open airing of the issues, because the influence of money in politics has really overthrown our government, in my view. And I do think it's a catastrophe for America. So what in the world can we do at this point? Well, the solution for the problem that I just stated would be campaign finance reform. If all the elections were simply publicly funded and you couldn't contribute to a candidate, that would eliminate the problem very substantially. The second thing that I've never heard anybody talk about is that I should stop.
Thank you, Laura.
Before I start, by a show of hands, how many of you believe global warming is a current serious problem? How many of you believe that carbon dioxide is the key villain in creating the global warming problem? I got the wrong damn audience. You can all go home. And I'm being very serious about that. My job today is to be the contrary voice to what you've heard from my distinguished co-panelists. One of the problems is that all of the work that came out of the United Nations study was based on modeling. I've worked with environmental models on the hydrogeology of Long Island for over a 30-year period. I know the benefits of modeling, I know the limitations of modeling. And modeling at its best depends on the quality of the data that goes as an input. The panel today was organized around Mr. Goldmark's comments. I would have to say Mr. Goldmark does not have any climatological credentials whatsoever. He's a very bright man, he's an environmentalist, he's not a scientist. The problem that we have in the topic of global warming is that too much hucksterism has come into it. When I hear people talk in apocalyptic terms that the end of the world is coming as soon as the global warming exceeds 2 degrees, it's irreversible. I'm always troubled by end of the world prognosticators. And I think everyone should be somewhat skeptical when they hear that. Let me point out some contrary views of qualified climatological scientists. Dr. Ramanathan, who got his PhD here at Stony Brook, was the first one that did a brilliant paper in terms of greenhouse gases, not carbon dioxide, but other greenhouse gases as being inimical to the environment. The qualified scientists at the time all negated his work. It took several years before he was proven correct and the quality scientists were proven wrong. Now, in terms of the current debate, let us assume global warming is happening. First question is, what are the causes? Well, the causes go beyond CO2. What Dr. Ramanathan had proven, at least to my satisfaction, is that more than half of the greenhouse gases, which have a shorter duration in the atmosphere, therefore should be easier to control. They don't last as long as the CO2. Whether we're talking about the dark carbon, whether we're talking about nitrous oxide, whether we're talking about methane, whether we're talking about ozone, these are all greenhouse gases, and they can be controlled. When Goldmark talks about his generation has failed, he's negating 30 years of superb environmental legislation. Now, from a policy point of view, nothing happens in any democracy in a revolutionary sense. It occurs in an incremental sense. That doesn't mean the public shouldn't be informed. Of course they should. And I have no problem about non-scientist environmentalists taking up the cudgel and fighting the battle. What I do have trouble with is when a scientist departs from the objectivity of the scientific method and becomes an environmental huckster, because that jeopardizes any good science that could take place. And let me just give you a couple quotes in terms of what I see happening that I resent very deeply, because any quality science that's coming out is negated by statements that negate the work of the good scientists. And that is a serious problem that exists today. For example, the data doesn't matter. We're not basing our recommendations on the data. We're basing them on the climate models. That's Professor Chris Folland, Hadley Center for Climate Prediction and Research. Dr. David Frame, climate modeler from Oxford University. Thank God he's not from Harvard. The models are convenient fictions that provide something very useful. Paul Watson, co-founder of Greenpeace. It doesn't matter what's true. It only matters what people believe is true. Emeritus Professor Daniel Botkin. The only way to get our society to truly change is to frighten people with the possibility of a catastrophe. And these comments go on and on. Professor Stephen Schneider, and I'll end the quotes with him, Stanford professor of climatology, lead author of many of the IPCC reports. Quote, we need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination. So we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. Any scientist who's willing to be dishonest where the means justify the ends is doing the greatest disservice not only to his science, but to humanity as well. And this is a great concern. If you want to know why the public is skeptical, it's because of issues that I've just mentioned. And let me observe in the scientific method, every scientist is supposed to have peer review of their work. That means the hypotheses that are advanced have to be tested, have to be replicated, and it has to be in an open forum. Many of the attempts that have gone on to have legitimate scientists who disagreed with the UN to meet, inform, and debate these issues are told from Al Gore on down, the debate is over, we have all the answers. That is not the scientific method. I can appreciate why Darwinians will not debate with creationists, simply because one is arguing religion and the other is arguing science, and obviously there's no point that they can meet on. But when scientists refuse to debate with other scientists, that's a departure from the scientific method. And that does more harm than the public not being fully informed. And that's the concern. That's one of the problems we have to address now. And there are solutions. One of the solutions is to address all the other greenhouse gases, and we've started to do it. Freon is now regulated in many parts of the country. There has to be global support. That work has to be done, but it has to be done honestly. And on that point, I'll rest.
Terrific.
All right. Well, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to try to refute Lee Koppelman because I know others worthier will do that later. So let me talk about the media. I am a journalist, and I'm also going to start by asking a question, which is how many of you feel like the American media has done a good job covering climate change? Can I see a hand? Nobody. Nobody? Nobody. How many of you think maybe? That's kind of you. How many of you think they've done a good job covering Iraq? Iraq? Good job covering Iraq? No. How many of you? Maybe somebody? No. He's just adjusting the camera. Okay. How many of you think they've done a good job covering, I don't know, Lindsay Lohan? Like that. So I think we can all agree that the press can do a lot better job covering climate change than it does. And I want to just briefly try to go over with you some reasons why I think this is an extremely difficult issue for the press to cover. And in doing it, I wanted to draw a distinction that's often drawn in these climate discussions between weather and climate. And just as in the atmosphere has weather, these short-term phenomena, and climate, these longer-term trends, so does the media. And right now, I would say both the weather and the climate are extremely unfavorable for good coverage of climate change. So weather, let's just talk short-term. Cancun conference starts yesterday. This could have been the lead story everywhere, but just because of the weather, coincidence, there was a monsoon yesterday, and it was the release of the WikiLeaks data. It was huge, and it swamped climate change, and then there was also over in Korea, a potential cyclone hit. And that was the possibility there was going to be war between North and South Korea. So climate change is basically off the front pages today. A slightly longer term weather thing, this year, climate coverage was the lowest in maybe 4 or 5 years. And I would say the main reason, single reason, was the BP oil spill. There are very few environmental reporters left in America, and the ones who were largely covering the BP oil spill. Now you'd say those things are related, but there was enough just to cover the oil spill, and papers with very limited budgets and other news organizations spent a lot of their environmental money on the BP oil spill. But looking at the sort of broader thing, climate, the kind of atmospheric conditions that exist over long periods of time. One of the chief ones for the media is it's the news media. It's news. It's novelty. It's novelty. Now we may debate here whether climate change is real or not, whether carbon dioxide is the main cause. But I'll tell you, in the mainstream media, case closed. They accept the science. They accept the science, and now it's become old news. Glaciers are melting. Tell me something else that's new. They were melting last year. They're melting a little more. Well, that's a little story. So they're melting a little more. So now this is not impossible to find things new about global warming. It's easily done. I mean, Carl talked about some things around the world. There's actual reality to global warming. that can be seen and written about, and those things would be new to American readers or viewers. But it's not done, and I'll get into some of why that it's not done. Then there's the idea that the media loves personalities and conflict. And that's not just the media. Oh, the media loves personalities and conflict. I mean, throughout human history, storytellers have told their stories about personalities and conflict. I mean, Shakespeare did not write Wikipedia entries, and he didn't write peer-reviewed articles in Science magazine. He wrote stories about strong personalities and conflict, people who hated each other, loved each other, feared each other, killed each other. People like reading this stuff. So again, you have the pro-global warming scientists, the anti-global warming scientists, you have personalities in conflict, they used to be friends, now they're enemies, yada yada. And the science just goes by the wayside. Again, there are other ways of bringing personality and conflict into journalism, coverage of this, but they take effort and money. Another thing is that, contrary to what a lot of people think, the media primarily sees themselves as followers rather than leaders. Documenting things that have occurred and have been done by other people, that have occurred, not that will occur, may occur, might occur in the future, by and large, I'm saying. And preferably something that's occurred in a big, noticeable way. You know, a one-time event you can cover, the earthquake in Haiti. And there's actually been a study, very interesting study that tried to equate coverage of disasters over a long time period. And it found that for an equivalent likelihood of television coverage, one death in a volcano got as much coverage as 40,000 deaths by drought. Because the deaths by drought are slow. They're slow onset disasters, and that's what global warming is. Slow onset disaster, there's no event. There's nothing to cover. Then we get the more recent climate catastrophe in news, which is the fact that news organizations have been undergoing like a depression with massive layoffs. 1/3 of all newsroom employees have been laid off. Those jobs have been lost in the last 15 years. 2/3 of all newspaper science sections have gone out of existence in the last 15 years. CNN closed its science unit 2 years ago. They still have health, but they closed their entire science unit. I just read, there's something called the Earth, I can't remember the name of it, but it funds third world journalists to come to climate meetings. Well, this year, besides the third world journalists, they're paying for American journalists to go to Cancun, including a reporter for the Los Angeles Times, which is the 4th largest circulation paper in America. You need a third world supporting organization to pay them to send someone from Los Angeles to Cancun, which is practically the same zip code. So, but that's a problem. And the biggest layoffs have been in the two fields that matter most to climate coverage, which is international reporting and science reporting. So that the person now who's covering climate change may be the same person who's covering traffic accidents, school board elections, and the price of groceries, and got out of college like 3 years ago. They don't bring a lot of context and knowledge and depth, enough to actually set an agenda for themselves as opposed to following other people's agendas. So what can be done? I'm probably out of time. Okay. Well, luckily, I had a really great idea about what could be done, but I don't have time.
You'll get a chance. Okay, what we're going to do now is allow each of the panel members 2 to 3 minutes to respond. I think what we all would like to hear is more about what needs to be done, what can be done, and what can be accomplished, as opposed to what the problem is. So we'll start with Elaine and move down again.
Well, I think in the short run, there needs to be a little broader take on the climate problem. There is a great deal of skepticism out there. Might be because of money, might be because of scientists, being a little bit too enthusiastic in their plans, who knows, but the skepticism about climate change is real. It is prevalent in every poll you look at, and it affects this new Congress profoundly. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that we give up, because there are other reasons to in fact, deal with the question of carbon in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases. One of them, of course, is a national security argument. And that's an argument that I think could, in fact, reinvigorate some of these issues in the new Republican Party. I mean, we have fought now a lot of wars in a particular part of the world. There are many other parts of the world that have bad actors in them, terrorists, bad dictators, etc., and we don't go to war there. How come they don't have oil? Okay, so there's a national security way to start framing this. I think the second thing is that we are probably going to have a big debate on tax reform. And we're probably due for a big tax overhaul. In that context, the question of a carbon tax, I think, is going to come up time and time again. And the reason it's going to come up is because people have sort of accepted that, well, we should tax things that are bad, not things that are good. So people are completely accustomed to cigarette taxes. I mean, back in the day when I actually smoked cigarettes, I remember they cost 35 cents a pack. Somebody told me that they cost like $7 a pack in New York City these days, which is stunning. Well, that's one way to get people to stop smoking cigarettes, right? And people are sort of accustomed to taxing bad things. We also have a very, very severe employment crisis, and people are looking at reducing the payroll tax. Now, if you reduce the payroll tax as a means of creating jobs, you still have to replace that revenue somehow. And a lot of people are beginning to talk about replacing the payroll tax or a portion of it with, in fact, a tax on carbon. Now, why do we keep coming back to this price on carbon? The reason is that the basic problem in climate change is an economic problem. Coal, especially, is really, really cheap. Coal is just vastly cheaper than just anything else around, and lots of countries in the world have lots and lots of coal. So the way to equalize this is to tax the externalities, as the economists would say, put a price on carbon dioxide. And unless we can do that, what'll happen is we don't really have the economic incentive out there for any alternative. So that's where the debate is. Can we manage to price carbon and all the other greenhouse gases? I'll throw that in, yeah.
Okay. Malcolm?
Well, thank you, Jim. In today's New York Times, there is a blog by Andrew Revkin. Now, Andrew Revkin was a full-time employee of New York Times, but he has gone elsewhere. He's a friend of Carl's, but he was one of my heroes in that he wrote very responsibly, especially about Arctic regions. His story, and he's down at Cancun today, is entitled "Coal Trends Still Rule Climate Talks." This is exactly what Elaine was saying. Coal is cheap. If you don't put a price on it that values the damage it does, and our economic system doesn't put a price on the waste it creates, the product will create, or the use of it, or the damage it does. It's just considered to be free for the taking. So we have this new Advanced Energy Institute here at Stony Brook. I'm pleased to see my colleague and friend Harry Davidian here, who is very interested in renewable energy systems. The Institute held a big conference in New York City a couple of weeks ago. People are looking, and until we find a cheap replacement for coal, we're all just waving our arms in the air. So that's number one. We need a national energy policy that takes all these factors you've heard today into account and to move forward. Every year, the coal we burn took nature 18 million years to create. That's not sustainable. The second problem that Lee Koppelman brought out is what Paul Krugman, an opinion writer for New York Times, economist, has talked about the modern day Cassandra. Remember, Cassandra was that woman Apollo had the hots for, and she resisted his advances. So he punished her. He gave her the gift of prophecy, but he cursed her that no one would believe what she was saying. And that's how we find ourselves today. And we're hearing from Elizabeth about, people think this is old news. How do we, in a responsible way, tell a story and yet people don't want to hear it? That's a big problem, and we don't know how to solve it. And then thirdly, back to the young people. Our hope lies with young people, and I'll hand it back. My time is up, right?
Yeah. Carl?
Well, it worries me that when Malcolm said, and people won't believe it, he turned to me and looked at me. I don't.
You're the storyteller. You're the best storyteller.
Oh.
You're the best
All right,
storyteller.
so people will believe it.
Yeah.
All right. A word about hucksterism. What in the world does Paul Watson have to do with the climate debate? He talks about whaling. And you excoriated him for saying it doesn't matter what's true, only what people believe is true. And that's true. That's why we don't have good climate policy. That's why we don't have good energy policy. That's why people don't care about the science, because what actually matters is what people believe, not what's true. So even that statement on the face of it is true, but it's probably taken out of context. I'm going to guess that probably that was a bad choice. As Malcolm said, coal is cheap because we don't pay for the damage it does. It's like stealing a car and crashing it into a tree is cheap if you walk away. That's the economic system that we have. Those things, the damage, are called by economists externalities, a terrible word because they are intrinsic to the actual event. But what they are is they're external to the way we've priced it, because we price only the thing we want, which is the coal, and all the other things that come along with the coal, which are called cheap, cheap being destruction of the heat balance of the planet, the acidification of the oceans, and other very expensive results, are not priced into the trade in our current economy. Because when the economy was invented, people didn't know about those kinds of effects. There really weren't any. You just wanted to buy some grain or a piece of meat. And what externalities really are, a good way to think of externalities is they are other people's problems. If you can get away with sticking other people with the problems, then you've lowered the cost to yourself. So you let somebody else replace the car you crashed and replant the tree that you broke. And that's really the kind of economy we have, and that's why the markets don't work for the problems that we have, because the markets would work if the economy was rational. The economy is not rational because it doesn't include the cost of the trade, only the pricing that we put on the trade. Now, we are in this era where no one wants to talk about taxes, even though a tax would be a good and simple thing. But I kind of feel at this point that taxing carbon is, and carbon dioxide is clearly the main thing that's caused the climate to change. It's for the sheer volume of it. It's too much of a head-on thing right now politically, I kind of feel. And I think that because everybody wants to be saving money and cutting the budget, well, we have all these major subsidies that go to oil companies. We could level the playing field more, and we could let more innovation happen in the green energy sector if they weren't pinned down under the extraordinary lobbying of oil companies that get us to pay them to pay lobbyists to make sure we can't get out from under them. And if we could cut the budget enough to eliminate all the subsidies to big oil and big coal, we might give these green things a chance. I also think that there are many reasons. Oh, I have to stop again.
Not bad. Finish your thought.
I think there are many reasons besides global warming. If we forgot about global warming, there are really good reasons to change our energy base. Coal and oil are wrecking the stability of the planet that maintains our civilization. We fund all these petro-dictators. We fund these countries that don't like us, that send terrorists, and we could create infrastructure and jobs in innovation that would regain U.S. leadership. So to me, a lot of this is easily frameable as a national security issue and a patriotism issue, which I really think it is in this country. Many of our most innovative companies have gone to places like Germany and Denmark and China, and we're suffering this innovation brain drain because our policies don't favor them. So, okay, well, I had to stop, so thank you for letting me go over.
Please.
Well, I hope we'll go out of here with some positive thoughts. Let's address the question of the CO2 cycle. One of the things that we could do on a global scale is to try and prevent the cut down of forests, such as in the Amazon and elsewhere. Having said that, I could give everyone in the audience a little job to do. You don't have to go to China, which is the most polluted country in the world. You don't have to go to any of the third world countries. Just stay right here in Suffolk County, right at this university, next to what's supposed to be an Ashley Schiff ecological preserved forest. This university wants to cut down all of the trees going up to it to put a goddamn hotel at the entrance to the campus. So one task I'll give you people, chain yourself to one of the trees and you'll be doing some good. Those of you here in Suffolk County, I'll give you another assignment. And here's one of the obscenities in the whole debate on this environmental issue. Should we have more research on alternative methods? Absolutely. Brookhaven National Laboratory wants to participate in this process. Well, if you want to have a solar farm, it would seem to me you go to the Mojave Desert where all they have is sunlight. And that's an ideal place to put solar panels. Brookhaven Lab, a beautiful piece of property with some very fine woodland on it, has decided they're going to promote solar panels. So they want to cut down an entire forest grove in order to put solar panels. What they're going to prove escapes me completely. So here are two local things that I'd like to see the public galvanize. They're not just the young ones. Everyone who's an environmentalist could work on that problem. But there are other issues, and Dr. Ramanathan came up with a brilliant solution. The third world, including the Asian countries, China is no longer third world. It'll probably be the #1 power in the next 30 or 40 years. But all of their energy is high sulfur, soft coal, or coke. In Africa, they do their cooking with animal dung, or they cut down the nearest tree for wood to do their cooking. Millions of people are dying all over the world because they're ingesting that garbage, because they're doing the cooking indoors. And he came up with a simple solution. A simple stove that would be an alternative, that's inexpensive to put in, that could eliminate one major source of carbon dioxide and improve the health of the people. And the other thing that can be done incrementally is to continue the research in terms of alternatives. And Carl was absolutely right, and my colleague from Harvard was absolutely right. The solution has to be an economically feasible solution, or it isn't going to happen. Well, in looking for alternative sources of energy, that's an industry of its own accord, and that's something that I'm sure even the Republicans would be willing to promote because it means creation of new jobs.
Well done. Elaine will finish up the panel. She has one great idea she wants to tell us about. And then I'll turn it over to your questions. So prepare some questions. We should have, what, 10, 15 minutes to do questions? 10 minutes. Okay, go ahead, Liz.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think in this question of making people aware of the, well, external, if you want to call them costs, the ancillary costs or the down the road costs of cheap energy, what's currently cheap energy, I do think there the press can play a very useful role. And I think that some of that also jives with what Elaine said of highlighting the parts of this issue that seem most harmonious with the current Republican world, like, the national security, but also the whole tax revolt and the Tea Parties. I thought there was a very, creative and interesting, and I found interesting article last Friday on the front page of the New York Times about the city of Norfolk, Virginia, where sea level is rising and people's houses are being flooded, and FEMA has already spent almost over $800,000 to raise 6 houses, like 4 inches each, and now the people in this neighborhood want the city to spend $1.25 million to raise their roads 18 inches, which everybody admits is only gonna cut down on the flooding, not gonna stop the flooding, but the people in this neighborhood hope it'll save their property values long enough so they can sell their houses and move out. And anyone reading this story has gotta say, my God, what's this gonna do to the tax rate in, Norfolk? Do I wanna be paying taxes to?
FEMA is federal.
Right, but raising the streets, 18 inches, which is the 1.25 million for one block of streets. I mean, there's plenty of places around here where stories like this could be done that might lead people to say, wait a minute, this is actually gonna cost me a lot of money on my tax bill. Tea Party kind of people could be influenced. The one thing that I did want to mention also as like a helpful thing is, there are ways of making it easier for the press to do a better job given that there are many inexperienced, time-pressured people. And one thing I just wanted to mention was somebody who's here, Scott Mandia, some of you may know him, who's a meteorologist from Suffolk County Community College, is playing a leadership role in this recent effort just started a few weeks ago called the Climate Change Rapid Response Team, where a large group of climate scientists from various fields have kind of banded together to pledge themselves to just respond really quickly to any press questions, requests for factual material, requests for explanations or context, and Scott and 2 of his colleagues are sifting those, are like the gatekeepers for those requests. And that, I think, could actually be a very helpful and useful thing that could improve coverage if it becomes, widely used. So there are other, smaller things like that, but I think, and I do think that the new media, and the internet is far from achieving its potential as a media source, and I do think that we're at the nadir now of news coverage, and that as people find ways of making money from news on the internet, which is still not clear really how to do, it will be a real blooming of good quality reporting and journalism from around the world that will dwarf past international reporting. And when that happens, and I hope it happens soon, that will be very, very helpful, I think, for this issue.
Thank you. All right. 10 minutes, questions from the audience. Keep the questions short, please. Yes, sir.
Quick question regarding taxing. I'm all for the idea of doing something about a problem. We can't, say that there's not a problem. But, putting it in the political spectrum of taxes, do you really think our Congress, who's terrible of the money they have already and so susceptible to corruption already, is going to be able to really do anything value added to a situation like that? I see them selling this out of the backyard, really.
That would be a little bit hard to do. I mean, the advantage of a tax is that it's transparent and you know where it's levied and you can tell if it's collected. And the IRS is pretty good compared to the rest of the world in collecting taxes. Just try not paying yours. Okay, so I mean, look, I don't think right now there is any appetite at all to price carbon. Okay, I mean, it's just not in the near future. But down the road, as things change, as perhaps the as the wheel turns, as it often does, the question is where do you go in the effort to tax carbon or to price carbon? And that's where people are moving back to the idea of a tax because of the inherent complexities in cap and trade. Europe has tried a cap and trade system for 5 years now, and they have no reductions in carbon dioxide. It has been nothing but a trading scheme for traders. So, and that's the disadvantage of a trading scheme. Taxing schemes are different because governments know how to do it. Governments generally are pretty good at doing it, and governments have an incentive to do it, unlike a trading scheme. So
Another question?
that's the
Gentleman over here.
idea.
I'd like to address this to the gentleman sitting next to Elaine, please. Your name is?
Lee Koppelman.
Mr. Koppelman? In your presentation, I want you to clarify something for me. In your presentation, you mentioned models, and you said that the existing climate discussion is based upon inaccurate models. You described the models that the climate thing was based on as inadequate, or
So what your question is Lee saying that models are not
Well,
accurate?
The problem is he's.
Well, let's just keep it at that, because I want to get other questions in,
Well,
okay?
let me just present you the entire question. At the end, you seem to be a proponent of global, supporting global warming, but the discussion of models, it sounds like you're arguing against global warming.
One thing has absolutely nothing to do with the other. One could understand the process of global warming. That doesn't mean that the modeling that has taken place has provided all the answers, which in my judgment, it has not. And when the scientists who worked on it make statements, as I made, that they weren't concerned about data, that makes me wonder about the quality of their models. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that the more complex a model becomes in terms of the number of parameters or the number of differential equations that have to go in, if it's a mathematical model, the more parameters you have, the more complex the model, the more difficult to verify the model, and if you're using it for predictability, that in the year 2040 or 2050, X is going to happen. Let me just point out that the modelers who just concentrated on sea level rise came up with a range, depending on who did the model, from 2 feet to 12 feet.
So your position basically.
We've got to give other people a chance. Right over here.
My question is to Dr. Safina. Since
Not
we-
nice and loud so everybody can hear
okay.
you.
My question is about individual action. Since we have an audience of very young people, it seems like it would be, are there ways in which we as individuals or at a more grassroots level, not just larger political level, things that our students, young people can do to have an impact, a positive impact to change what's happening with climate change?
Well, yes and no. And I think that's a double-edged sword, because I think that everybody can try to do things better in their own individual life to, let's say, reduce our energy use so that we don't burn as much fossil fuel, right? Like, we could use fluorescent light bulbs, and we can drive small, higher mileage cars, and we can carpool. We can do all of those nice things. They won't make a dent in the problem by themselves. But if we don't do those things, then we don't take the personal stance required to make a meaningful contribution collectively to the problem. Because basically we're saying, I don't care, I can't do anything about it. And if you think that way, then you don't care and you won't do anything about it. So you do have to adopt a stance and a conscious lifestyle where you just try to do things better personally all the time, but you have to understand that that doesn't get you where you need to go, it only gets you where you need to start. And where we need to go, I just want to say the Goldmark article that this whole meeting is partly convened around, I don't like it. I don't like what he has to say. I think he's wrong about young people. I think he's right about our generation failed. I think that it's not young people or old people or what. It's that the politics are all screwy right now, and they go counter to the reality of what's happening. And young people and all kinds of people need to re-rationalize the politics and do need to be really politically active. It doesn't take a lot of voices to influence a congressional office. If they get 20 letters on an issue, they think that this is huge. That, in a way, is how broken our democracy is, but that, in a way, is how influential each of us can be. But it goes beyond changing your light bulb. You do have to be involved in a political process that is one of the most precious in the whole world, because we really have a democracy that can work, and it really is being dismantled.
Last question over here. you have a question? Last question? Harry Davinian?
These things tend to degenerate into gloom and doom, and I wanted to give a positive note, very much oriented towards things we can do to make things better as individuals and as a community. Very few people in this room, I will bet, are aware that Long Island is in the forefront with regard to applying Energy Star legislation, standards, to all new residential construction. 10 of the 13 towns on Long Island, town boards, local town boards here on Long Island, passed changes to their energy code to require that new residences be built to Energy Star standards. Those residences will use 30% less energy, and that's a big deal because a lot of our energy use is in buildings. And I ascribe the achievement of that largely to one person. His name is Neil Lewis. He was with the Neighborhood Network at the time. He is now with the Sustainability Institute at Malloy College. He went around from town board to town board, slogged through these meetings, cajoled, persuaded, he didn't give up. And he got 10 town boards on Long Island to adopt a very important piece of legislation. So if you're looking for things to do, there are things you can do. We have to get the state to do the same thing. We have to get those other 3 towns. We have to get the villages. But there are things we can do as individuals, even on a small scale, to affect these problems in a positive way.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Harry, and thank you for, that's an appropriate positive note to end on. I want to thank everybody for coming out on a rainy afternoon.